Tesla owners who are putting stickers on their cars to say they don't fuck with me are so petty. Like, grow up, you bought from my company and I know you don't regret it, Elon Musk snarled as he stormed onto the set of Andrew Brown's talk show, his voice dripping with contempt. The studio lights glared off his sharp features, amplifying the intensity of his presence. The audience, a mix of die-hard fans and curious skeptics, erupted into a chaotic blend of cheers and boos, sensing blood in the water. Elon didn't sit. He loomed over the chair, pacing like a caged predator, his hands slashing the air to punctuate his disgust. These weren't just words. They were a middle finger to every Tesla driver who dared to slap a "Not with Elon" sticker on their sleek electric rides. The crowd ate it up, some laughing nervously, others shouting back, but no one could look away. Andrew Brown leaned back in his host chair, arms crossed, his face a mask of calculated calm. He'd seen big personalities before, but Elon's entrance hit like a freight train. The topic had been simmering online for weeks. Tesla owners, once proud evangelists of the brand, now scrambling to distance themselves from the man behind it. They claimed they'd bought their cars back when Elon was just a quirky genius, not the polarizing tornado he'd become. Social media was ablaze with photos of Teslas sporting stickers, some crude, others clever, all screaming the same message. "We're done with you, Musk." Andrew had invited Elon to address it, expecting a fiery rant, but this was a Molotov cocktail lobbed straight at the audience. Elon kept going, his voice rising, accusing these owners of hypocrisy. He painted them as spineless trend chasers, too weak to own their choices. Didn't they realize Tesla wasn't just a car? It was a revolution they'd signed up for? Why were they so eager to play victim now? Was it really about him? Or were they just scared of their woke friends side-eyeing them at brunch? The rhetorical jabs landed hard, each one twisting the knife deeper into the growing divide between the man and his customers. The audience shifted. Uncomfortably, some nodded, others whispered to their neighbors, unsure whether to cheer or jeer. Andrew's calm cracked just a hair. He'd planned to ease into the debate, but Elon's aggression flipped the script. The host's eyes narrowed as he watched the billionaire pace, every word a spark threatening to ignite the whole damn studio. Who did Elon think he was, shaming people for their feelings? Sure, the stickers were petty, but wasn't it their right to say it? Andrew's mind raced. He'd interviewed politicians, actors, even a disgraced televangelist once, but this felt different. Elon wasn't just defending his brand. He was waging war on anyone who dared question his legacy. The tension thickened, a storm brewing behind Andrew's steady gaze. By the time Elon finally dropped into the chair, legs sprawled like he owned the place, the room was a powder keg. Andrew adjusted his tie, a subtle signal he was ready to strike back. The audience hushed, sensing the shift. This wasn't going to be a polite chat. It was a collision course, and everyone knew it. What kind of man demands loyalty from people he's never met? Was Elon blind to how his own actions fueled this mess? The questions hung unspoken, but they pulsed through the air, daring someone to light the fuse. Andrew Brown didn't let the silence settle. With Elon sprawled in the chair like a king on a throne, the host leaned forward, elbows slamming onto the desk with a thud that echoed through the studio. His voice cut through the air, sharp and deliberate, accusing Elon of acting like a dictator over people's personal choices. The Tesla owners weren't just slapping stickers on their cars for fun. They were pissed, and Andrew made damn sure everyone knew why. He pointed out how these folks had shelled out big money for their vehicles, back when Elon was still the golden boy of innovation, not the loose cannon he'd morphed into. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others glaring at Elon, who sat there, with a smirk that could have melted steel. Andrew didn't hold back. He tore into Elon's recent antics, tweeting conspiracy theories at 3 a.m., picking fights with world leaders, and tanking stock prices with offhand comments about alien invasions being good for business. The host's words were a battering ram, each one slamming into Elon's ego. He called him a hypocritical asshole, claiming Elon couldn't handle the same free speech he preached when it turned against him. The audience gasped, then roared, split between shock and delight. Andrew's face flushed as he pressed on, arguing that people had every right to distance themselves from a guy who'd gone from visionary to walking PR disaster. Why should they be stuck worshipping at his altar just because they bought a car? Elon's smirk vanished. He shot up from the chair, towering over the desk, his eyes blazing with something feral. He fired back, his voice a low growl that built into a shout, accusing Andrew of pandering to a bunch of whining snowflakes. He didn't give a fuck if owners trashed him. They were still driving his genius, still charging up on his grid. He claimed they were too chicken shit to admit they loved the cars, stickers or not. The insults flew fast. Andrew was a spineless hack, a leech feeding off outrage for ratings. The crowd erupted, some chanting Elon's name, others hurling boos. That drowned out the cheers. Andrew stood too, matching Elon's height across the desk, their faces inches apart. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound, and called Elon a delusional prick who thought the world owed him loyalty. He brought up the Tesla layoffs, the factory scandals, the promises of self-driving cars that never came, each jab a fresh wound. The host's hands shook with adrenaline, but his voice stayed steady, hammering home that Elon's controversies weren't just headlines, they were screwing with real people's lives. The studio felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with sweat and fury. Elon leaned closer, his breath hot, and spat out a wild claim. Half the sticker crowd were paid shills from rival car companies, a conspiracy to smear him. Andrew barked a laugh, calling it the dumbest shit he'd ever heard, and accused Elon of dodging accountability with tinfoil hat excuses. The audience was a mess. Some jeered Elon's theory, others ate it up, whispering about Big Auto's dirty tricks. The fight wasn't just about cars anymore. It was a bare-knuckle brawl over power, pride, and who got to define the truth. By the time they broke apart, both men were panting, the desk between them a battlefield littered with verbal shrapnel. The crowd was on its feet, screaming, some clutching their phones to capture the chaos. Andrew's eyes locked on Elon's, daring him to swing again. The billionaire's jaw clenched, his mind clearly racing for the next move. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Elon's jaw twitched as he glared across the desk, the accusation of paid shills still hanging in the air like smoke after a gunshot. He didn't sit back down. Instead, he circled the set like a shark, his voice booming as he doubled down. He claimed he had proof, data scraped from dark web forums, showing rival CEOs bankrolling this sticker rebellion to tank Tesla's image. His hands slashed the air, painting a picture of a vast, shadowy plot. Ford, Toyota, even some German assholes in leather jackets, all cackling as they wrote checks to turn his own customers against him. The audience split hard. Half laughed it off as unhinged. The other half leaned forward, hooked on the idea of a corporate war playing out on their driveways. Andrew wasn't having it. He slammed a fist on the desk, the crack silencing the room. For a split second before his voice roared back. He called Elon a paranoid fuck, a man so full of himself he'd rather invent a cartoon villain than face the truth. People were sick of his shit. The host spun to the crowd, arms wide, asking if they'd ever met a single person who didn't think Elon had lost the plot lately. A few shouted, "No!" while others heckled, but Andrew plowed on, listing every batshit move Elon had pulled. Buying a zoo to clone extinct animals, threatening to nuke Mars for fun, tweeting that gravity was a hoax. He exaggerated, sure, but the crowd didn't care. They were too caught up in the fire. Elon wheeled around, his face red, and hurled a fresh insult. Andrew was a bottom-feeding jackass, a failed comedian hiding behind a mic. He claimed the host couldn't handle a real fight, that he'd crumble if he ever stepped out of his cushy studio bubble. The personal dig hit hard. Andrew's eyes flashed with something dark. A wound ripped open. He shot back, voice low and venomous, saying Elon was the real coward, hiding behind money and bots, while his customers suffered recalls and broken promises. The air crackled, the audience feeding off the venom like it was a drug. Then Elon went nuclear. He accused Andrew of being in on it, a puppet for the anti-Tesla agenda, paid to stir the pot on live TV. He pointed at the host's sleek suit, snarling that it screamed dirty money. The crowd gasped, some cheering the wild twist, others booing. The sheer insanity. Andrew's laugh was jagged, almost unhinged, as he ripped off his jacket and flung it at Elon's feet, daring him to prove it. He screamed that Elon was a delusional bastard who'd rather burn bridges than build a fucking car that worked right. The studio shook with noise, yells, stomps, a glass shattering somewhere in the back. The producers scrambled backstage, headsets, crackling with panic, but no one dared cut to commercial. This was too raw, too real. Elon grabbed the jacket, holding it up like evidence, his voice a growl as he claimed he'd have it tested for traces of big auto cash. Andrew charged around the desk, stopping just short of swinging, his chest heaving. The audience was a sea of raised phones, capturing every second of the meltdown. Security hovered at the edges, unsure who to grab first. The standoff held, a heartbeat away from violence. Elon's eyes burned with defiance, Andrew's with rage. The crowd was rabid, split down the middle. Some chanted for Elon, others for Andrew, a civil war breaking out in the seats. This wasn't about stickers or cars anymore. It was a grudge match, a public execution of egos, and no one knew who'd walk away bleeding. The air in the studio was thick with sweat and rage as Elon dangled Andrew's jacket like a trophy, his smirk daring the host to snap. Andrew's chest heaved, fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't lunge, not yet. Instead, he turned to the crowd, his voice raw and shaking, and laid into Elon with a ferocity that sucked the oxygen from the room. He accused the billionaire of turning Tesla into a cult, demanding blind devotion from owners while he spiraled into a self-obsessed train wreck. He painted a picture of hard-working people, nurses, teachers, regular folks, who'd saved up for Teslas, only to watch Elon torch their trust with every reckless stunt. The audience stirred, some faces softening, others hardening against the man in the spotlight. Elon dropped the jacket, stomping it into the floor as he roared back. He called Andrew a sanctimonious prick, a vulture picking at the bones of honest ambition. He defended his chaos, claiming every wild move, every tweet, every headline was fuel for a future no one else could see. He leaned into the crowd, shouting that those sticker-waving cowards didn't deserve his cars if they couldn't handle the heat of his vision. His voice cracked with something primal, a mix of pride and desperation, and for a moment, the room felt his gravity. Some cheered, caught in his orbit, while others hissed, repelled by the arrogance. Andrew seized the crack, pouncing like a wolf smelling blood. He mocked Elon's vision, calling it a fever dream sold to suckers while the man hid in his mansions, counting billions. He brought up the Tesla workers sleeping on factory floors, the lawsuits piling up, the promises of Martian colonies that never left the ground. His words were a barrage, each one landing harder, and he finished with a gut punch, saying Elon wasn't a genius anymore, just a loudmouth who'd forgotten the little guy. The crowd split again, some yelling, "Burn him!" at Elon, others screaming, "Shut up!" at Andrew, the noise a deafening wall. Elon's face twisted and he went low. He accused Andrew of faking his everyman act, claiming he'd dug up dirt, the host's fancy vacations, his ties to shady ad execs. He snarled that Andrew was a fraud, a leech who'd never built anything worth a damn, just torn down giants. For clout. The personal attack hit like a sledgehammer. Andrew's eyes widened, then narrowed, his whole body tensing. He fired back, calling Elon a sociopathic fuck who'd sell his own mother for a headline. He stormed the stage, pointing at the billionaire's chest, saying he'd never know what it meant to struggle, to scrape by, to care about anyone but himself. The audience was a powder keg, fists pumping, voices hoarse from shouting. A woman in the front row stood, hurling a water bottle that sailed past Elon's head and smashed against the backdrop. Security rushed in, grabbing her arms, but the chaos spread. Others surged forward, some to defend Elon, others to back Andrew. The producers screamed into their mics, but the feed stayed live, the world watching as the studio became a battleground. Elon laughed, a harsh, jagged sound, egging it on, while Andrew planted himself center stage, daring anyone to cross him. The line was gone now, guest versus host, fan versus foe. It was all one mess of fury. Elon's defiance clashed with Andrew's righteous anger, two forces too big to coexist. The crowd fed the fire, their screams a soundtrack to the collapse, and in the middle of it all, the two men stood locked in a stare that promised more blood before the night was done. The studio was a madhouse, security wrestling with audience members as shouts and shoves blurred into a storm of chaos. Elon stood tall amidst the wreckage, his laugh cutting through the din like a blade, taunting the crowd to bring it on. Andrew matched him, chest out, barking at the mob to pick a side. Him or the billionaire who'd lost his damn mind. The water bottle's splash still glistened on the backdrop, a symbol of how far this had spiraled. Neither man backed down, their stares locked like prize-fighters in the final round, each waiting for the other to blink. Andrew struck first, his voice a growl that silenced the front rows. He accused Elon of turning Tesla into a vanity project, a toy for his ego while owners dealt with glitchy software and exploding batteries. He spun a tale of a single mom he'd met backstage. Her Tesla had stranded her on a highway. And Elon's response? A tweet about colonizing the moon. The story hit hard. The crowd's roar softened into murmurs, some heads nodding, picturing their own nightmares with the brand. Andrew's eyes blazed, calling Elon a heartless bastard who'd rather play God than fix a fucking car. Elon's laugh died. He stepped forward, voice low and lethal, and flipped the script. He claimed Andrew was the real parasite, exploiting sob stories for applause while he, Elon, bled for progress. He rattled off numbers, millions of miles driven, emissions slashed, saying Tesla owners owed him their smug green cred. Then he went wild, accusing Andrew of staging the whole fight, planting that bottle thrower to make him look bad. He pointed at the host, snarling that he was a cheap con man, a puppet for ratings who'd orchestrated this circus. The crowd gasped, some booing, others cheering the twist, unsure what to believe. Andrew's face went white, then red. He lunged, stopping inches from Elon, and screamed that he'd never stoop that low. Unlike Elon, who'd faked his whole genius act to sell cars. He called him a fraud, a spoiled brat who'd stumbled into wealth and now pissed on everyone below him. The insults flew thicker. Elon was a dickless wonder, Andrew a gutless worm. Each one a Molotov cocktail lobbed into the audience. Fists rose again. A guy in a Tesla cap tackled a heckler, and security hauled them apart, shirts tearing in the scuffle. Then came the curveball. Elon yanked his phone from his pocket, holding it up like a weapon. He claimed he'd just gotten a text, proof the sticker campaign was traced to a rival exec's burner account. He grinned, triumphant, saying he'd bury them all in court while Andrew ate crow. The crowd exploded, some chanting, "Elon, Elon," others yelling, "Bullshit." Andrew snatched the moment, calling it a desperate lie, a rich man's tantrum. He turned to the audience, arms wide, asking if they'd trust a guy who'd rather sue than apologize. The room split, a deafening clash of loyalties. The chaos peaked, chairs tipped, a mic stand crashed, and the producers finally cut the house lights, plunging the stage into a strobe-lit nightmare. Elon and Andrew stood frozen, breaths heavy, the crowd a sea of shadows roaring around them. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was survival, a test of who'd break first. The end was close, but the wounds were deep, and the air hummed with unfinished business. The strobe lights pulsed like a heartbeat, casting jagged shadows over the wreckage of Andrew Brown's studio. Elon stood defiant, phone still raised, his grin a jagged slash of victory as the crowd's chants clashed, half screaming his name, half cursing it. Andrew faced him, sweat streaking his face, his body coiled like a spring about to snap. The air was electric, thick with the stench of spilled drinks and torn loyalties. Security flanked the stage, barely holding back the mob, but neither man cared. This was their ring, and the fight wasn't done until one of them fell. Andrew broke the deadlock, his voice a ragged roar that cut through the noise. He told Elon to shove his phone and his lawsuits, saying the truth didn't need a screen. It was in the faces of every owner he'd let down. He pointed to the crowd, calling out a guy in the back, a mechanic who'd bragged pre-show about fixing Teslas that rolled out half-baked. The guy stood, nodding grimly, and Andrew seized it, saying Elon's empire was built on their sweat, not his genius. The audience roared, some clapping, others jeering, but the shift was palpable. Real stories trumped wild conspiracies. Elon's grin faltered, his eyes darting to the mechanic, then back to Andrew. He fired back, voice booming, claiming he'd dragged humanity forward while clowns like Andrew threw tantrums. He tossed the phone aside, a dramatic thud against the floor, and spread his arms, daring the crowd to deny his wins. SpaceX rockets, Tesla highways, a world remade. He called Andrew a whining bitch, a footnote in his story, and vowed to outlast every sticker, every hater, every lie. The loyalists erupted, a wave of cheers drowning out the boos, and for a moment Elon seemed untouchable. But Andrew wasn't. Finished. He stepped forward, voice dropping to a steely calm that hushed the room. He said Elon could have the headlines, the billions, the worship, but he'd never have respect, not from people who'd seen through the smoke. He turned to the crowd, asking them to stand if they'd ever felt burned by a promise, Tesla or otherwise. Slowly, then faster, dozens rose. Workers, parents, kids with phones still recording. It wasn't a majority, but it was enough. A silent army staring Elon down. Andrew smirked, calling him a king with no kingdom. And the sting landed deep. Elon froze, his arms dropping, the fire in his eyes dimming. He scanned the standing figures, then the chaos beyond. Tipped chairs, ripped signs, a studio in ruins. He laughed, a short, bitter sound, and muttered something about sheep and wolves. But the swagger was gone. Andrew didn't gloat. He just stood there, chest heaving, letting the moment sink in. The crowd felt it too, a shift from war to reckoning. Security finally cleared the aisles, the lights steadied, and the noise settled into a raw, exhausted When the cameras cut, Elon walked off, head high but alone, his silhouette sharp against the exit. Andrew stayed, shaking hands with the mechanic, the mom, the ones who'd stood. The audience filed out, buzzing with what they'd witnessed. Not a knockout, but a victory of grit over gloss. Elon would keep building, tweeting, raging, but here, tonight, Andrew had stripped him bare, and the people had chosen. The show ended, the stage dark, but the echo of that choice lingered, loud and final.